Tech University in Butte, Montana. If you don't know, Dr. Masters is a professor of biological anthropology, specializing in human evolutionary anatomy, archaeology, and biomedicines. Explores how the persistence of the long-term biological and cultural trends in hominin evolution may ultimately result in us becoming the ones piloting these disc-shaped craft, and we will going to talk about them very soon. Dr. Masters is also author of two books, Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon, and recently published his second book, The Extratempestrial Model, where he argues, could UFOs and aliens be us from the future? Identified Flying Object cautiously examines the premises that extraterrestrials, quote unquote, are instead our distant human descendants, returning from the future to study their own human and evolutionary past. The second book deals with the most famous UFO abduction cases, which baffles people, and we were going to ask him why he chose them. But let us welcome Dr. Master. First of all, hi, how are you doing today, sir?
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
First of all, my apologies to guests. Yesterday we had some technical issues, and it's normal. It happens sometimes, so wasn't intentional. But we said, okay, we were not going to give up that soon, so we were going to do tomorrow. And here we are.
Better late than never, right?
Oh yeah, we have all the time, and we can.
Absolutely.
Okay, Dr. Masters, let me ask. Starting the show by asking a question from one of my good friend, and he said, please ask him, have you ever seen a UFO yourself, or you had any close encounter of any kind so far?
Well, no is the easy answer to that, and also the hard answer. It's every answer. No, never have. I thought I almost did in June. We were driving back from Ohio, and I think we were in like Iowa or something. And there was this white disc-shaped object just hanging in the sky, and I watched it for like 5 minutes, and I was like, oh. And then it disappeared, and I looked at my wife, and I said, I might have just had my first UFO sighting, because it hovered and then disappeared. Pretty common characteristics. And she was like, oh, sweet. And we get up a little closer, and it turns out it was just a biplane spraying the fields. Okay. But because it was flying away from us, it had that shape. I could just see the bulge in the middle and the wings. And so it looked like it was hovering, and then it disappeared because we went down in a little valley and the trees came up, relatively speaking. So I've come close, because I thought I saw one once, but as it turns out, it was not.
Well, that is also interesting, because the first thought which came in your mind that it may be a UFO. So is it that you always interested in UFO, and that's why that was the first thought was in your mind?
Well, as a skeptical person, my first thought is, no, that's probably not a UFO, and it wasn't. So I sat there and I studied it for a while before I even said anything to her. And then, even once it disappeared, I was still looking in that area. And, eventually, even if I hadn't seen the biplane after that, I still would have been pretty skeptical if it was or not, because it looked lighter in color than most are described being. They're usually silver or blackish. So, I'm always looking. I'd love to see one. I'd love to have a very close encounter. I'd love to go on board one of these ships and talk to the humanoid beings that seemingly pilot them from all kinds of different times. I think it'd be ideal to be one of those people who is on a ship piloted by many different forms, the very modern human-looking beings, the kind of hybrid-looking, the more gray type of individuals, because I do think they represent different periods in time, and they seemingly collaborate. As far as I can tell, it's my best interpretation of what's going on there, that they're collaborating across different time periods, or there's something else going on. But yeah, I think it would be awesome.
Well, the one thing that you are actually getting quite famous, I say quite famous because you already have more than 300 podcasts. You are appearing on TV shows now. I saw you on 2, I think, separate History Channel documentaries where you appeared as a guest. So is it? I think it's quite possible that some of these, future descendants might say, "Well, this guy seems quite interesting. He's way ahead of his time because he's he's saying that we exist. So let's go and pay him a courtesy visit and say, hey, yes, secrets for you." But
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I don't share your optimism. I also don't consider myself famous in any stretch of the imagination. Um, I think who was it? He's actually interestingly he studies UFOs as well. He was on a show called Kids in the Hall. I can't remember his name right now, but yeah, he once said that being famous only means that you've been on TV. So by his definition, technically I am, but I don't think that that's the case. Um, I really just am trying to get this idea out there, as are a lot of other people in various capacities. So the more I can do that, I'll take opportunities to do so. But I'm certainly not seeking fame and riches. I just think this idea is worthy of consideration, and I try to make a strong case in support of it. And the best way to do that is to get it out there in the various media that people consume. And yeah, television, podcasts, radio, documentaries seem to be the best way to do that.
yeah, well, you never know because this is kind of a very, how I'd say, idea. Because once you start developing or working on this kind of thing, so it's difficult to leave and say, okay, no, I'm going away from it. So let's say you have another 80, 100 years, you probably writing about these things for a very long time. So it is quite possible that somebody might say, show up on your door, say, hey, I'm from the future, man. So you should be, take something, some kind of a recording device with you wherever you go, because you never know.
I mean, I
Would
guess
be a
we
good
all
idea.
have them these days in the form of the phones we carry in our pockets. We might even need to change the name because very few of us, I think, even make telephone calls with them or even answer the telephone when other people call. I know I don't. I prefer to text or message or WhatsApp or whatever. But yeah, no, I mean they are recording devices. It's funny though how often people don't think of that. They'll have an experience and be like, "Oh, I really should have taken some pictures or videos." It's almost like the UFO apathy plays into our inclination to instantly think, "Oh, I should document this." I think I'm in a better position because I see a bunch of weird stuff all around me in the woods all the time. Like we've had two different bears in our yard this last week, and there's always elk and moose and deer running around. So I'm kind of conditioned to get out the camera, and I think having children does that as well, where that you're always trying to capture those special moments. So yeah, I think I am ready. I'm pretty quick on the draw when it comes to that stuff.
Well, I will not say good luck because I don't know how this will going to end up. But anyway, uh, okay. Please explain for those of my friends who are still living under a rock. Uh, what is your hypothesis, if you will, in journal terms or briefly, that the future humans are coming back through time? Was it simply a coincidence because you happen to be a evolutionary anthropologist? You go and you dig bones and you see some similarities and say, hey, that look interesting because our ancestors kind of look like us because they have two noses, they were walking upright, and maybe these these aliens the people describe, they look kind of similar, or was something else in it? So I mean, I just want to know how you came up with this idea of time travel.
Well, no, it's kind of the opposite actually, where I thought of this idea when I was very young, um, knowing absolutely nothing about evolutionary biology. In fact, I grew up in a place where it was not only not taught, but oftentimes stigmatized in the school system and churches and just with everybody you talk to on a daily basis for the most part. But my I did learn about an experience my father had with the UFO before I was born, and he got Whitley Strieber's book Communion probably when I was 8 or 9 years old, And I looked up on the living room shelf and saw it and sort of had this moment of clarity, if you could call it that, where yeah, like you just described, I recognized the similarity in the craniofacial form of us and these beings, and in the context of our ancestors we have kind of the middle ground between these, where our early hominin ancestors had long faces, what we call orthognathic, or rather prognathic facial structures. Orthognathism is what we have, where our faces have shrunk back. And they have low sloping foreheads, and our forehead has grown out. Our faces have shrunk back. And then if you look at this archetypal gray alien form, they have the continuation of these same trends, seemingly, where they have big round heads, a lot of parietal expansion, mediolateral expansion in their neurocranium, and a further reduction in their mid and lower facial anatomy. So if you look at all these things together in the context of our phylogeny, our evolutionary history, and that's the main thing I focused on for my dissertation in graduate school, and the main area of research since then has been an evolutionary change in our craniofacial form. And so getting into that, I was drawn to that because I had this question in my mind: is could they be us from the future? And looking at the continuation of these same trends, you mentioned bipedalism. We're the only habitual biped among all primates and among all mammals in a broader context. So if that's something we share with our ancestors and these beings as the trait that defines hominins, then I think we have to consider them in the context of whether or not they evolved on this planet as well, whether we're related, and more specifically, if they could just be a more evolved version of humans in the future.
I'm asking also in this context because we are nowadays somehow conditioned, because our ancestor used to see or describe angels and demons. Is it not that we are just doing the same thing, and instead of calling them angels and demons, we are calling them extraterrestrials, or in your case, extratempestrials?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think all aspects of ancient folklore and myth can be ascribed to this phenomenon, but I do think certain aspects of the past in both the historic and prehistoric context can be. A lot of things that you see in cave paintings and carvings and geoglyphs and petroglyphs, I think do seemingly depict similar things to what we describe today. And you can sort of understand how, if it is the same beings or same types of beings, because I do think they're coming from different points in the future. In my first book, I mostly described them in the context of these quintessential big-headed, small-faced, grayish-skinned, colored grays, essentially, because we classify everything by skin color as humans, apparently. And if they could, be our distant future humans. But I do think that we're going to have this technology sooner than later, and that's something that sort of came out in researching this most recent book, the Extratempestrial Model, where it would appear that we start doing this much earlier than I'd previously thought. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we already have some of these technologies that will allow us to do this in the near future. Um, but yeah, I think, even if say we took us right now, if we are able to do this at this very moment, which I don't think we're quite there, but if we were and we went back in time, people 200 years ago would definitely notice that our clothes are different, our technology is more advanced, but we basically look like them. But the farther back we go, even though we're the same people from this same time, they start to describe us in different terms based on their own myth and legend and folklore. And we may even be deities to them because of the seemingly magical abilities we possess. So, yeah, and I think it might be the same thing looking forward. Whereas we get deeper into the future, they have technology that allows them to do things that seemingly violate our laws of physics. I don't think they do. I don't think they're violating our laws of physics. I just don't think we understand physics well enough yet to be able to describe exactly what they're doing. So we ascribe these magical qualities, even godlike qualities. I think there's a case to be made that a lot of religions of the past were the result of this phenomenon. It grew out of this as probably a small group of observers. There's this expression in religious studies that religion equals cult plus time. So even if you had these UFO cults, they could eventually grow into entire religions, and possibly even some of the global religions we have today. So yeah, I think because of the timelessness of this phenomenon. And if these are future humans coming back to different times, we would expect them to be described in various ways, like jinn and pixie fairies, leprechauns. But again, I don't think it explains all of these aspects of ancient myth.
Well, we do have some recent stories. I mean, I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, because it's always difficult to get the accurate information, that the President Eisenhower supposed to met in February 1954 with an alien. And to be honest with you, when I heard this story first time, I said, how is that even possible? An alien from a different species, from different planet altogether. It's not even possible. It's not technically possible. But if you see the context of time travel, then it makes actually sense, because it could be like you're saying that he was from the near future, let's say 200 years in the front, and he said, okay, let's go back and tell the president, I now look, these things going to happen, so you don't need to worry about it. So I don't know if you heard this story, but what do you think? Is it probably the
Yeah, I
same?
have. And I think that if that was the case, if it did actually happen the way it's been described, I think he faked a dentist appointment and then allegedly met with this extraterrestrial, extratempestrial. But I think given the context of that and our relationship with nuclear weapons and the insane amount of testing we are doing with those, and my understanding is that not long after this, we pared back the number of tests and really modified the way we do it, where we do it, how often we do it. And that would seem to be, it would make more sense in the context of future humans who are stakeholders in the future of this planet and who don't want to inherit an Earth that's uh, just spewing radiation into the atmosphere, into the soil. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if that did happen, it might be better to consider it in the context of future humans trying to preserve the sanctity of this planet that they inevitably inherit from us, just simply as a result of being in a future time. So yeah, I mean, some people obviously know if it happened or not. I'm not one of them that does, but if it did and the story is accurate, I think it's worthy of consideration in the context of this model.
Okay. One of my guests just asked, and I wanted to ask you this thing also. If you read your books, you, I would say, support the so-called block universe model, in which the time travel seems possible. Because the other one, multi-universe, it's a bit chaotic in nature. So there are people who think that there are the problem with these paradoxes, like grandfather paradoxes. It's not a problem in block universe. Is that the one? That's why you say that I accept this kind of model.
No, not necessarily. I mean, you're right. These paradoxes don't seem to be relevant in the context of the block universe for reasons I'll describe in a second. But the reason I started from that perspective is because it is the dominant model, the most accepted view of time based on our current understanding among philosophers and physicists and those who study time and have studied time for centuries. It's not just physicists. They don't have a monopoly on the study of time. In fact, philosophers have been doing it much, much earlier. But the general consensus among all of them is that we live in a block universe and that there is no fleeting present. The past is just as real as the now. The future is just as real as the past and the now. And all of these moments in the universe are part of this massive four-dimensional block of space-time, where you can kind of think it of looking down on a sheet of paper and you could see all moments in time. If we get rid of one dimension of space and impose that other dimension of time, it's all there as this landscape. It's sometimes called landscape time as well. So yeah, in the context of these perceived paradoxes, they don't really exist because the moments of the past are structured in a way that can't be changed. Anything that you did in that past, you had already done before even leaving to go do it. All of those moments are connected between the past and present as this structured entity, this unchangeable aspect of the block universe and the way it exists. So it's only when you interject change that you start to have paradoxes. Like, what if I can change the past and go back and kill my grandfather before he gives birth to my mother or father? But same situation with the multiverse. If you can go back and change something and make another timeline, now you have some paradoxes that arise with that as well. There's issues with the law of conservation of matter and energy, where you're creating another universe seemingly out of nothing. Where does that energy come from? Where does that mass come from? So yeah, I adhere to the block universe because it's most likely correct. We may find out in the future that it's not. But that aspect of the paradoxes was secondary. It was just kind of a happy surprise that they don't really exist in this context, simply because of the way the universe is structured in the block universe model. And it just makes more sense. It's intuitive. It just seemingly, it explains a lot of things even beyond time travel. Precognition, I think, is one that makes sense in the block universe model as well, because you're seeing things in your subconscious that are there in the future that we haven't yet made memories of with our brains, our physical brains, but they exist as a part of our conscious reality. And I think our consciousness is timeless. And in the block universe model, we can see events in the future because they're already there. And we're able to bridge those and get information about that future event even before it happens in physical terms, simply because we can bridge that gap in our consciousness. And oftentimes in a unconscious dream state is when it happens.
So the quantum mechanics or quantum physics is also one of very successful scientific theory of our time, but the conclusion we can get from the quantum mechanics is that the inherent the basic nature of the universe is chaotic. I would say it's not certain. This uncertainty principle. So how do you reconcile then these two different, seemingly different ideas, where in block universe you have, okay, I'm not going to say there will be a certain future, but we will end up in a certain future anyway. I mean, we cannot change that. It's going to happen. Everything is already exists simultaneously. The past exists now. We are here, and the future as well. And no matter what we do, I mean, there is very few limitations or I think options we have. But how you reconcile the quantum mechanics or quantum physics with the block universe concept?
Well, I mean, you're kind of asking me to answer a question nobody has an answer to in a way, because we're all the quantum.
Just your opinion. Okay.
Yeah, well, quantum mechanics just studies the very small, the particles, the muons, and all of the little bits that make up atoms. But in order to answer that question, we have to circle the square between that tiny world and the big world, the world of gravity, the world of general relativity, the world of special relativity. How do we do that? Nobody knows yet. A lot of people are working on that, and I think once we do have an answer to that, when we have a theory of quantum gravity and we can understand Einstein's theory of general relativity in the context of the ultra small bits of our universe, I think we'll know. But until that point, I don't think we can yet. I don't think it flies in the face of the block universe in any sense. We impose probabilities on the quantum world because we can't determine anything until you have quantum decoherence. So once that happens, we have a state that is knowable. And it's kind of like how people say, well, there's all these possibilities in the future, but that future is also somebody's past. So it's already laid out for someone. It's just about perspective. And I think it might be the same thing with regard to your question, where if we're talking about, well, all of these different probabilities exist with regard to this outcome in the quantum realm, but once we have that, we can look back on it as something that did happen. We had an observer who studied that. We have decoherence and we have something that's tangible. And I think it's kind of the same thing with time. With the block universe, all of those probabilities have already reached one. They've reached a point where we know what the outcome is. It's just that in our perspective, looking forward, we aren't in a place where we can determine that yet. In my opinion.
Okay. That's fine, sir. Okay, one of the other difficult questions, I think, sometimes that uh, the question of why. Why would our future descendants, take risk? I don't know. I mean, how safe this thing is, but I assume a lot of energy is involved. Uh, so why would I know you answered this question before, but for other who who want to know, why would you, as a time travel, go back, let's say in 1600, and say, okay, let's go and see that what's going on? Is it just like a curiosity? I heard, I mean, stories like, well, it could be that they are just simply a tourist from the future.
Yeah, definitely. I make that case as well. I think we almost have to separate the different aspects of the phenomenon when we get to the question of intent and why. Um, and it's also important for me to acknowledge my own biases in answering that question, because that's what I do is I study the past. That's what we do in anthropology and my specific discipline of biological anthropology and the discipline within the discipline of paleoanthropology, as we try to understand our physiological past, our evolutionary past. And what we have currently without time travel technology is the preservable fossil and dental remains, which do give us some information. There's an upper limit with the ancient DNA we can get, and we've been pretty lucky to have extracted DNA from some Neanderthals and other ancient Homo sapiens sapien subspecies. But it's still not the same as picking up an individual and studying the culture. We can see how they use different symbolic things, which is completely lost in the archaeological record. And so when we talk about the material culture, that's all we have. We just have the things that preserve. We don't have the clothing that people wore. It just decays. If they were using wood tools that weren't left in a very dry cave, we don't have information about that. So we have a very biased perception of the archaeological and the biological record of our ancestors, simply because of what preserves and what doesn't preserve, more specifically. So if we had access to time travel technology, we would have a wealth of information beyond what is currently accessible now, and not just within the context of biological anthropology, but cultural anthropologists, linguists, sociologists, psychologists. We could get information about political systems and economic systems that we just don't have access to. So I think it's really an information gathering thing, but undoubtedly, if we do create this technology, we're going to monetize it. And maybe, the tourism part helps pay for the research part too. There's some sort of overlap there. And we already see that happen in the space. You have Virgin Atlantic and SpaceX and Blue Origin trying to monetize taking people to space because there's a demand for it. And there's got to be even bigger demand, I would assume, for seeing your favorite period in time or your favorite ruins that aren't ruins. You get to see them in all of their glory in ancient Greece or Egypt or Northern Africa. So I think, I think it's probably both. I think it really is research oriented. I think that might be the main driver, but I think if you can, maybe even in the private sector, if you can develop backward time travel technology, and as I mentioned in my most recent book, it may even be a requirement for interstellar travel. If we are going to travel at high speed to different stars and investigate those with human crews, we need to account for the time dilation effect associated with that. So if, because of the twin paradox is how most people conceptualize it, you travel at high speed, space and time are compressed, meaning time moves slower inside that craft. So if you're out on this long distance journey traveling at very high speed, you come back, now you're out of sync with the time of the society that you left behind, and you don't want to miss 3 years of your kids growing up, or all your friends that died if you're older because of old age. So I think to get into deep space, we also have to figure out backward time travel in order to get back to not only our home planet, but also our home time. I think that would be a huge sacrifice for people in exploring space. So, yeah, I think it's all three of those things and probably other factors as well.
Yeah, I also heard you were saying something about this homogenization of genes. That could be. I mean, that they have some kind of problem with their. We are becoming like a giant. I don't know what you call it, incest pool, gene pool, and we
Yeah.
may have some difficulty. What was that?
I
Okay, okay.
I think I made a reference to a stagnating gene pool of the future. I think it was some reference to like a kiddie pool that was all mucked up. I don't remember the exact wording, but yeah, no, you're right. In the context of intent, it might not just be about learning about the past. They might be getting things from us that they use to solve their own problems in the future. And yeah, even beyond, like I mostly in my first book focused on the genetic homogenization that seems inevitable, simply because we are able to travel across the world and we do have migration among what used to be separate populations. We used to have gene flow, and we can't have gene flow for all the same population. It'll take some time for that to happen. But if it does, yeah, essentially we have incest on a global level. There's no new genes to come into the population in the context of gene flow. You still have mutation, but most mutations are harmful, so they wouldn't persist. But even beyond that, we've seen a 60% reduction in sperm counts in men in the Western world over the last 40 years. A study just came out recently demonstrating that. We have fertility interventions to help people who genetically aren't able to have children have children. So we're introducing more of those genes into the next population and a number of other things too. It just seems like we're on a path to where we're probably going to need to get new gene variants in order to diversify our gene pool in the same way that we do with other species that are on the brink of extinction. They have very limited populations and therefore a lot of incest. So we try to manage in zoos as a good example, where we'll take genes or actual individuals from different zoos and try to mix them into others just to diversify that gene pool. So yeah, we may have to do that for ourselves. And if we exist on this island of Earth in the future, the only place to get those wild type gene variants that don't exist in our current population might be in the past. And I think that could help explain why you typically have more abductions take place within specific lineages. If they have something about their genetics that's more useful to these individuals in the future, then you would expect them to keep coming back and taking gametes from these individuals that are part of these lineages. So, yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. It's probably not just about research or tourism. They're probably doing something that helps them in some way that we don't yet fully understand.
Well, on the other side, I mean, it's kind of sad that we are just, uh, like lab rats for them. That they come. I mean, who knows if you let your wild theories or ideas go? I mean, it's quite possible they said, okay, we need these guys because we need some kind of biological material from them.
Yeah. And I know I didn't really talk about the ethics of that very much in my first book, but definitely try to discuss it more in the second one. Because, yeah, these could be seen as immoral. Morality through time is sort of a difficult thing. Even in modern times, universal human rights, it's largely understood that they don't really exist and they can't exist because if you try to uphold one person's rights, you might violate somebody else's. So it's kind of a sticky wicket when it comes to things like this. But undoubtedly, they would see us as research subjects or um, just if we're necessary for their own survival in some way. That extraction of gametes, of sperm, egg, developing fetuses, it may be that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So some people are sacrificed, for lack of a better word. And I talked about that in the context of the way some of these people perceive it too, how they conceptualize what's happened to them, oftentimes throughout their entire lives. Many of these abductees are young girls or young boys when they're first taken and have the same things happen to them, oftentimes revolving around reproduction. So yeah, there's definitely ethical questions involved in that, but a lot of these people do recognize that they're part of some greater good. There's something bigger that's taking place, and some even feel happy that they were selected to be a part of it.
Okay, the technology it's quite advanced. I mean, in the future, it will be also highly regulated. I mean, it's not like you go and let's say, okay, I want to go to 1600 and I want to see my grandfather. So, is there any military aspect of this technology which we should be careful? Because it seems, although these machines appear randomly all over the places, but they are somehow interested in our defense related installations like nuclear installations. Uh, so, is there any military aspect of this technologies also which we should be worried about?
I don't think we need to be worried about it, no, but I do think that's probably an aspect of its development because it always has been with humans. And if they're humans, I'm sure it's the same. If we're talking about the really distant future humans, I don't think there's a military aspect to it because I doubt they have war anymore. I'm pretty sure our consciousness evolves to the point where religion and war become moot, a thing of the past that they probably think is a very primitive aspect of our existence in this time. But yeah, it's funny when you say too that their technology is seemingly very advanced. Um, and we would also expect ours to be advanced in the future. It's not just the physical form, the morphology that indicates this, but we have, ever since the first stone tools about 3 million years ago, this descent with modification that's happened in our culture and our technology as well. So if we look to the past, see where we are now, we could probably look to the future and presume, extrapolate that our technology would be far more advanced too. And it cracks me up. I hear this all the time. People talking about these extraterrestrials that have technology that we won't have for hundreds of years. And that they don't make that connection. And it cracks me up because you're talking about our own technological evolution, which is very tangible and looking at the past. And we project that forward and we make this comparison about what these beings from another planet must have based on how long it'll take for us to have that same technology, but they don't make that simple little switch in their mind to recognize that this could be our technology from that time that they're talking about when we actually
Yeah,
get it.
yeah,
And it's so frustrating because I hear people talking all around this, and for some reason, it just I don't know, this idea it just doesn't occur. Even people that can start out talking about this idea will still have this conversation. Somebody just sent me an interview yesterday, and I was listening to it, and they even started at one point talking about this time travel model and then used all of these words in the context of future technology and how long it would take for humans to have this, but outside of the context of that model. So I don't know. I wanted to complain about that ever so briefly. But no, I do think the military uh, correlation. I don't think it's necessarily about their own use of this technology in the context of war. I think it's more about studying us and our fascination with war. The fact that you had the Foo Fighters. Um, that's funny. I just saw somebody write something about a sci-fi book that I actually just started writing a sci-fi book 3 weeks ago. It's a funny
Hey,
coincidence.
I'm also writing my science fiction novel. I'm half through. It's also the same
Awesome.
subject. Same
I just
subject.
started mine. I'm already 10,000 words into it, even though I
Hey,
started it a
I got
couple
like
weeks ago.
35,000 words, so that's a good
Nice.
idea.
Hey, let's have a race. Let's
All right.
we'll have a word count race. But no, I do like the focus on the military installations, the fact that they're all around the Nimitz and the Roosevelt, the fact that you had more sightings during World War II with the Foo Fighters. Clearly, there's a fascination with what we're doing. I think it's partly just interesting because, like I said, I don't think they really go to war with each other, especially not in world wars. And I think they're probably concerned that because we are so primitive and driven by political and religious dogma, that we're going to launch these nukes. It's only recently that we've had the technology to blow up large swaths of the population and destroy the ecology of this planet. So I think the focus, the relationship with the military is more about them studying us and ours, uh, less about the technology being used for that in the future. But again, if it did crash into a previous time, say the Roswell crash happened, the cover up, the lies, that have been perpetuated since that time, the PSYOP, the misdirects, was likely to protect that trade secret, that intellectual property that was gifted to maybe not just the US, but other countries as well that may have recovered crashed ships. Because, yeah, it's always been an arms race. Whoever develops technology that's better at killing people spreads with that technology through the process of diffusion and migration. So, yeah, I wouldn't doubt that that's a factor, but I don't think they're necessarily using it to kill each other in the future.
Yeah, well, my favorite, if you ask me, I think I always tell my friends that if you ask me what is my favorite conspiracy theory, that it's time travel, because it is the only, if you believe in these stories, then it is the only theory which explains everything. Because in the context of an alien civilization visiting us from a different planetary system, it doesn't make any sense. There are so many problems with that. But yeah, your model
Well,
it does explain almost everything.
Yeah, almost, I think, is an important qualifier there. I don't think it explains everything. There's, I was having a conversation with someone recently on Twitter, Instagram, somewhere, about Skinwalker Ranch. And there's a lot of weird stuff that happens there that I don't think necessarily is the result of future human UFOs. Maybe it's related somehow, but I don't know. I definitely think it's the most parsimonious explanation. I think it can explain much of the phenomenon, but there's still other things that I think we need to keep an open mind about and consider other models too. It's probably not one thing; it's probably a lot of things. But I do think, as far as like the nuts and bolts aspect of this, and even some of the spiritual consciousness aspects of it, still fits well with this extratempestrial model.
Yeah. Okay. In the first book, you also, I don't know if I remember correctly, didn't touch the AI, the artificial intelligence aspect of it. Now, in your second book, and we're going to discuss, first of all, the second book is not like the part two of the first one. It's a separate discussion.
Yeah.
If you can explain this, and also if you can answer the question of the role of artificial intelligence. Is it quite possible that these machines are empty of any biological life, maybe just simply machines? And any ideas on? And then we're going to discuss some of these cases you mentioned in your second books.
Yeah. No, you're right. I didn't want to write just the same book or a follow-up to the book. What I wanted to do is present this idea in a different way. And so essentially my first book focuses on kind of the science of this, how we might apply anthropology, astrobiology, astronomy, and physics to understanding this phenomenon, but mostly in the context of long-term evolutionary trends in our culture and biology. The unlikelihood that we would have an upright walking hominin evolve separately on another planet in astrobiological context, the issues with the extraterrestrial hypothesis in an astronomy and physics context, how we can understand backward time travel in a physics and philosophy context. So I laid all of that out in this first book and sort of interjected ever so slightly aspects of the phenomenon, what people observe. But then the second book kind of flipped that on its head, where it looks at various case studies over the course of about 90 years on 5 different continents to give a cross-cultural and cross-temporal perspective, and then pulls in those aspects of these different fields. Because I do think we need a multidisciplinary approach to really understand this. And another thing I was trying to do, I got a lot of feedback that the first book was kind of dense and a difficult read because of the hard science that was interjected. So I wanted the second book to be more readable. It's a lot of stories, some that people are familiar with, some that are less familiar to people. And then, lay out these stories in the context, not just of this extratempestrial model, but also how do these things fit or not fit with the extraterrestrial hypothesis, ultra-terrestrials, simulation hypothesis, and others. So yeah, it's funny because I think some people wanted me to just write the same book over and over. And most people have enjoyed this second book, but there's been a few that really wanted me to just stay in this lane of hard science and that's it. And I don't think that's the right approach. I wanted this first book to be readable for a lay audience, but also something that would challenge my academic colleagues, because I do feel like we need to have this conversation in a broader capacity, especially now that UFOs are real, even though they always were. It's becoming less stigmatized. So I wanted something for them once, they get past this knee-jerk reaction to the UFO conversation, which seems to be happening a little bit. But the second one too, just a lot of people don't talk about the abduction aspect of the phenomenon, but I think it's an important side of the coin, and we need to turn that coin over and be talking about that as well.
So when you were selecting these cases for your second book, what was the criteria? What is a credible abduction case for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, and I don't think there's one right answer to that. I think there's a lot of variables that play into it. And I think J. Allen Hynek had the right idea in his book, The UFO Experience. He talks about the strangeness aspect of it, the reliability. He developed a scale, essentially. So I tried to follow that model to the best of my abilities, but also ones where there's multiple witnesses, which was also one of his important criteria. Uh, that involved high strangeness, that were revealing in some way, and also ones that sort of capture the spectrum, not just in time and space, but also with who saw them, what was the context, what continent was it on? Because it's not an American phenomenon, it's not a modern or recent phenomenon, it's timeless. And in my first book, I talk more about the prehistory and history of it. I think I called that chapter "A Brief History of Time, ... Travelers," as an homage to Stephen Hawking's book. But with this one, and honestly, I don't really feel like I selected them. I kind of feel like they selected me in a way. And it's not just the 15 case studies that have chapter headings. I brought in at least another 15 to sort of give another perspective, to either boost the point or to show a counterpoint. So yeah, it's just kind of a tapestry of a lot of different experiences, which in anthropology, what we try to do is take a holistic approach, where what we do is we focus on a cross-cultural global perspective. And the main thing that we do is look at time. We have a temporal perspective. So I try to do that in the context of this book, bring that anthropological approach, and also in the context of an abductive approach, not saying, not using deductive reasoning, but rather just looking at everything and trying to tease out the best interpretation, the most logical explanation that can give us not a factual understanding or any sort of conclusion, but just inference to the best explanation, which is what an abductive approach is. So that was sort of the process for writing that second book.
Are there any similarities or trends that you discovered? I mean, for me, if you ask me, when I was reading your book, or I was studying the other cases, it seems that there are few similarities on almost in every case you can find. For example, as I think you also mentioned, that the lack of noise, for example, it seems that the time flows differently near these crafts or near these entities, or it seems that there is some kind of field around these machines, which was described. So I found these quite interesting, because over the time, as you go back in time, when you can study these, almost everyone, I would say almost everyone, somehow says these kind of things happen to them. So is there any other similarities you discovered?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because that was another important part of this process, was looking for patterns. Patterns tell stories. They can inform you about things. And definitely a lot of patterns emerged in writing this book and researching it that I hadn't really considered before. And that one you mentioned was a reoccurring theme, that seems to be this zone around these craft where space and time are manipulated, as Hal Puthoff refers to it, where they're manipulating the space-time metric in some way. And that's very clear from the Linda Jones experience, the Corporal Armando Valdez experience in Chile, both of which also had multiple witnesses. And then Jim Peniston describes it as well, refers to it as a sphere of influence around these craft. And I think that's important to recognize, because it does indicate that they're manipulating space-time and that the laws of physics still apply, but it's a perspective difference. And I think that helps explain the G-forces, the transmedium capabilities, where they're not experiencing the world around them the same way we see it, where they have these 90-degree turns that seemingly happen instantly as they're flying thousands of miles an hour. To them, it's very likely they come to a complete stop and then accelerate slowly in this other direction. But it's because they're in different reference frames and they're manipulating the rate at which time moves in and around them, which I think is an inherent quality of the mechanics of the craft themselves, which may play into what I mentioned earlier about interstellar travel, that in order to accelerate and decelerate in these ways, they need to modify the rate at which time passes. Otherwise, they'd be splattered against the inside of these craft as they accelerate at 12,000 Gs. The no sonic booms, moving between air and water with ease. So yeah, that was something that emerged from researching this book. Another one is that, like I mentioned earlier, the different types of beings on the same craft. And to circle back to something you asked earlier that I think I overlooked in my response, the role of AI. I think it's important in the context of beings. I think they're making human-like droids in the same way that we're doing now. We're actually getting pretty good at it and making some very human-looking robots. They seemingly use those for the abductions. It's probably safer, less risky.
Like the Pascagoula incident?
Yeah, not just that one. Those were like robots. And Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson described them as robots. They didn't really have human characteristics, but there are others who describe human-looking beings that don't really appear to be human fully in the same way that we are. And I think that is something that's going to happen in our future. I think we're already working toward that, where there's a melding of biology and materials, that they're almost inseparable in a way, where you have these ships that open up, a ramp comes down, it closes, and there's no seam any longer. Another pattern is the lighting. Another pattern is how the craft can seemingly become translucent so that it just disappears around them. And yeah, you have to wonder if there's some interjection of biological components into the material science that go into creating that type of structure. So yeah, I do think, and that's something I overlooked in my first book. I didn't talk about AI hardly at all, other than in the context of how we might need it in the initial stages of testing backward time travel technology, so we don't lose humans. We can lose avatars or droids instead. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of patterns that emerged, and that was an important part of what I was trying to do with this text.
Okay, I think I heard Bob Lazar saying exactly the same thing.
Oh, really?
He once mentioned a incident. I have a clip. Now, the thing is, this clip is 3 minutes long. Let me play, because I think this is important, because he's described exactly the same thing. This time
You
bubble.
got it queued up already?
Yes, sir.
Did you come from the future? How'd you know we were going to be talking about that? That's funny.
Well,
you already know how this conversation went.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's watch this for... I know it's a 3 minute long, but you have to bear with me, but this is important. I think you will like this.
That alone is something amazing. Look, that can change everything we know today. Just having a machine to produce artificial gravity. Because look at what that does. We know gravity, space, and time are all tied together. There are your shields, like on Star Trek, that deflect micrometeorites. There is your protection from radiation without heavy shielding. There is something that, with an intense enough focused field, you can actually bend space, and there is something that can actually alter the flow of time. I mean, that's the missing piece of pie.
Didn't they actually freeze a
A candle.
A flame for
Yeah,
you?
now that's when it was connected to the gravity amplifiers where they could focus it, and that was
They froze a candle.
A flame
yeah. They
flame.
had a candle lit to set it up for you. Again, there's a large in the craft itself. There are 3 long pipes. I'd say, well, I don't know about what's that, 3-4 feet in diameter, maybe 5 feet long. Anyway, they dangle the 3 of them at the bottom of the craft. These produce gravitational waves, and they can focus them to a point or spread them apart.
Those are what you call the wave guides?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They're part of the power source control mechanism and the wave. Well, the waveguide is what I actually call the interlink between them, but that's the gravitational engine. They had one of those devices out along with the subsystem that connects it, so they can produce the power from the reactor. It runs the gravity amplifier, and they can focus and change the gravity beam that comes out of it. They took, speaking of Barry, took a candle, put it close to the mouth of it, lit it, a normal flickering candle flame, and then activated the reactor. The gravity wave came out as expected, and the candle flame remained luminous and stopped moving. And
Which
I mean,
defies physics.
yeah,
doesn't it?
because
The
look, if it's going to
photons-
freeze it, the photons should stop being emitted. If it's going to, change the characteristics. Look, how can the combustion continue to take place without the convection inside the flame? Because actually, the reason a flame is elongated is not really because of heat, it's because of gravity. Because gravity pulls down, and convection moves flames upward. It's why in a zero gravity environment, flame is a ball. Obviously, there's nothing to pull things around. But anyway, if you negate the gravity around it, why is it still pointy? How can it still be making light? And why doesn't it move? Well, I mean, heat, from what Barry said, it's not just gravity, but it's also time locked. You've
They
distorted
froze a frame of time.
Yeah, they essentially froze a piece of time there. And what do you say? I mean, it's empirical evidence. You're looking at it. It's not
interesting
not
that
a.
you could see it.
It doesn't make sense that you could see it. And look, the stuff I saw there was the most unbelievable, literally, because it defied what we knew as physics. And
I think he's describing exactly the same thing that we say.
Yeah, no, I think
There's a
so.
time lock. There's time lock on it.
Yeah, and that would make sense in the context of why it's only in close proximity to these craft that you experience that. And I cited a snippet from Hal Puthoff's talk at the SU last year, where he's talking about the same thing in the context of manipulating the space-time metric and missing time, a blue shift that happens in association with this, where it's shifting the visual spectrum of light between 400 and 700 nanometers up into the ultraviolet. You get more radiation burns as a result of that. But then the missing time aspect, and that would make sense in the context of what he's talking about there too, or they're freezing time or slowing down time within the confines of this craft, which mean that time continues to move outside of that, move at a faster rate relative to in proximity to these crafts. So you could help explain some of the missing time aspects. I think others are actually that people were abducted and taken into these ships for a period of time. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's all related. I hadn't seen that clip, but that's definitely relevant in this context.
Yeah, and it's also suggested that if he also said, I think, a couple of times that he think that there was some kind of a archaeological dig where they find these machines. In the context of your model, it is quite possible that some of these machines were sent from the future, may have crashed. We don't know. Could be possible.
Yeah, and if they crashed at a time that predates when we have the ability to scoop it up and start reverse engineering it, it's just going to sit there. It's going to become a part of our archaeological record in our past as well as their past. I think that was actually the premise of the last Indiana Jones movie, The Crystal Skull, or something
Yes.
like that, where he
Yeah.
discovers it, and again, big-headed, small-faced beings that future humans essentially is what they did with that. I was kind of excited when I watched that. Also watched it at a pizza shop, like a pizza movie bar. It was one of the coolest places in Columbus, Ohio I'd ever been to, where you get a big old pizza that they bring out in a movie theater, and there's a bar serving micro brews up front. So it was a fun night in general, but when they got to the end and showed this rotating disc with
Oops. Am I the only one? Can somebody write me on the chat that it seems that Dr. Michael Masters is frozen in time? Can you guys hear me? Aziz Moran Bhai, thank you very much. Oh no. I think we lost Dr. Michael there. Okay, so yes, we are here. Simone, thank you. I think something. Wow, that's funny because we were just we were just talking about frozen in time, and I just saw you frozen time.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
All right. Yeah, that gave me the boot. And of course, when StreamYard rebooted, it said plug yourself into the Ethernet because Wi-Fi is unreliable. Yeah. Thanks for that reminder after it happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, no, it's interesting to see, and I talk about this in the first chapter of my new book. That's one of many examples of just this idea making its way into pop culture in all of these different capacities. It's subtle, you know. At no point did Harrison Ford say, "Oh, you're future humans, and you came back in time and stored this thing here for when we need." That was never really overtly stated in the plot, but beyond that, there's all of these different ways in which the idea has been making its way into pop culture and the literature. And yeah, you got to wonder if it's right and we're just moving in that direction and it's starting to become obvious.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting point because I find this aspect of this thing because I also think that there is I'm not going to say there's a concentrated effort, but it do seems that, like you said, they don't say exactly the same thing. They always refer, or most of the time they refer, or it's an alien machine from some other planet. But we know it doesn't make that sense. It only makes sense or more sense if we talk about it in some country. That's an interesting point. Okay. Okay, let me see. I have a few questions there. I don't want to spend how much time we have. Okay, so this question of that these aliens or they're so advanced, but also seems that they can crash their machines. I think it also support our or your theory, I would say, because it's human. So like we do, even with this advanced technology we have today, in compared with the previous aircraft, we still crash them because it's not always the technology, but it's also the person behind the controls of that. So is it possible that we may see
humans are fallible? We can make mistakes. We crash things all the time.
Yeah, so it is possible that we may see some of these incidents happening in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you can have technological failure with even the most bulletproof design. The Titanic was unsinkable, like what's that big ass jet that Boeing made, thinking they could push the boundaries and then could hardly fly. Like I think humans are always going to try to push the boundaries as much as they can, and there's going to be negative consequences to that in the same way we see now. And if that's human nature, I think we would expect to see that in our future human descendants too. They try to go just a little too deep into the past, or fly just a little too fast, or forget to turn something on, or flip some switch, or turn something off, and next thing you know, boom, They created that same technology by interjecting it into the past.
Okay, I also forgot one thing to ask. You mentioned this also, that you wrote this book, but normally if you are if you are a scientist, it's very difficult to talk about these subjects because it's, people think you are crazy and stuff. So how was your experience so far after writing this book, these books?
Good. Yeah. I think it was time. I waited until I had tenure. I waited till I was promoted to full professor. I have a long publication record. I did and continue to do other research in the areas of biomedicine and archaeology and paleoanthropology. So I established myself as a scholar and played the game, essentially. I mean, that's the whole reason tenure exists, is so that you can talk about these things without worrying about backlash from the administration or your departmental colleagues. And, I don't know if I really even needed it, but it's that safety net that's in place. And yeah, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I think the most pushback came from those that have dogmatic views about the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I kind of expected more pushback from my colleagues and a little more of a gracious, or at least open-minded welcome from the UFO community, but it was kind of the opposite. I saw, at least initially, that's changed, but initially in 2019, there was some initial skepticism among many of my colleagues, but once they read the book, they saw my approach as conservative, it's cautious. And that's our job as scientists. I mean, that's why tenure exists, because it's our job to look at the boundaries of our knowledge and try to figure things out. And what's more at the boundaries of our knowledge than the UFO phenomenon? I mean, there's very few other things that are this unanswered question. When I published the book, is only recently followed the 2017 New York Times article, and even then it was an awareness that there's something more going on. But I think by now, in the 5 years since that publication, it's generally accepted that UFOs are real. And we couldn't say that even 10, 20 years ago. So I think the conversation has changed, and that's great for people like myself who have taken this seriously for a long time and have known it's a real phenomenon for a long time. And it's, I think it's something that hopefully more people will get involved with, not just my academic colleagues, but it seems that the private sector is becoming interested. I've been contacted by a number of investors who see the potential in trying to get out ahead of the technology, and especially if it is ours in the future, who's going to make that? Who's going to pay attention to this and say, oh, that's maybe how they do it, because we actually took time to study what people describe in these abduction accounts and other close encounters. So yeah, I think the conversation continues to evolve, and it's great to see. We still have a long way to go. I don't really care about disclosure too much. I don't really care if the same government that lied to us for 70 years finally says, oh, just kidding. We really knew all along. I think that's irrelevant. I think the real process and the real understanding is going to come from all of the other areas within government still, but also outside of that. And I think it's validating for experiencers. I think it's validating for people that have been talking about this for so long. Bob Lazar, as an example from the clip you just showed. So yeah, it's great to see. We seemingly still have a long way to go, but it's encouraging to see just how much has happened in a short period of time.
So the reason I asked you, because how, as a scientist, you make sure that you're not falling for your biases? Because I mean, let's face it, we have some our certain beliefs and ideas about it, and sometimes confirmation bias kicked in and said, okay, yeah, I think because I have this inclination of something and I see and then find the evidence. Because if you remember the case of Paul Benowitz and Richard Doty, you probably heard about. Now, Richard Doty was the OSI agent, I mean, counterintelligence agent, if you will. And he provided him this, the poor chap, false and lies, and he actually believed that. because at that time the Air Force was conducting some super secret testing of a new aircraft, and they had to protect it. Now I see the similarities between, let's say, Lou Elizondo. He is also a counterintelligence officer. He was a counterintelligence officer. So there is this aspect that we have to be careful about it. How you go about and make sure that you're not falling for some of these counterintelligence or disinformation campaign from the government. It could be possible that they have some kind of new tech, some kind of new proportion, and they just want to save it, and they just spread these lies through media, through these people.
Well, there's a couple of reasons to address that specifically. I don't rely on any of those. I don't have relationships with anybody in the intelligence community. It's never been a part of my research or the books that I write. So I don't really have to worry about that specifically, the sort of PSYOP campaigns that clearly have been perpetuated on the public and through these informants. I pay attention when people talk about it, but I take it with a grain of salt. In both my books, I talk a lot about the potential for confirmation bias, especially because I had this idea as a small child and wanted to investigate it further and even develop my course of study and my research objectives around this question. So naturally, I am the first to acknowledge potential selection and confirmation bias there. However, in doing science, we are forced to cross-check ourselves. We have a peer review process that allows us to do that, even if something sneaks past our own filters and our own sensors. So it's an innate aspect of what we do. I think it would be more problematic if I hadn't been brought up in the scientific disciplines, because anthropology is multidisciplinary. But yeah, no, it's a fair question and definitely something I'm aware of. I also think it's why we don't need debunkers and skeptics, because they start from a point of bias. They're oftentimes, it's sort of an anti-science pursuit. They're basically anti-vaxxers in a sense that they have a place of bias and that's what guides them. They have these blinders on and oftentimes use logical fallacies and anti-science rhetoric to try to just debunk everything, even if there is actually a case to be made for it. So I think, and if with a scientific approach, we don't need debunkers, we don't need skeptics, because we are our own skeptics and our own debunkers. It's built into the fabric of what we do in all of the different fields of science. And I'll be the first to admit that with UFOs, it's a little bit harder because we don't have
Oh no. I think we lost Dr. Michael. Guys, can you hear me? Anybody? Write me down on the chat if you can hear me. Okay, so you can hear me. Okay, yeah, I think he, yeah. We lost him. Okay, hopefully he will come back, because we are going to end it very soon anyway. It's just last few minutes. But I wanted to ask him this particular issue of how he makes sure. Oh, there you go.
I think I just remembered that you're supposed to use Google Chrome with StreamYard.
What are you using? I think it should work on the Firefox as well. Only on Safari. Only on Safari.
Apparently, because they booted me off twice, or maybe the government's pissed that I said we don't need them for disclosure.
Well, we are spilling the beans of. Yeah, I'm pretty
that's
sure
it. Yeah, they're on to us. Yeah, but no, I think we do need to be cautious. Whether you're using a scientific approach or not, it's important, and to recognize limitations of studying something mysterious and probably something that the visitors don't necessarily want us to know or didn't want us to know just yet, but maybe that's changing. I'm hopeful that it is, at least, because I think really disclosure is ultimately up to them. they've been the ones doing this throughout centuries, millennia. So if we are at a point where we get to know or can understand what they're doing and why, I think it's ultimately up to them, not the governments of any nation.
Okay, so in the end, what readers could take away from your books or from your research? Any particular thing you want them to
Well, like I said, I'm trying to offer an anthropological, holistic perspective, but also one that's interdisciplinary, because I do think that's going to be important, and not just one person drawing from different disciplines, but ultimately that we all come together, work together in trying to understand what's going on in real terms. I think there's a lot that we can learn from consciousness studies, near-death experiences, psychedelic research, in addition to the nuts and bolts, more material aspects of this phenomenon. And I think that'll happen innately. I think it's going to occur organically as we reduce the stigma and the reality of this phenomenon becomes more broadly understood. So, my books are really just an attempt to add to that, to add to the literature of the past, and to offer different ways of looking at a model that I think should be discussed more. The idea's been around since the 40s, as far as I can tell. So, it's not a new idea, but it's one that hasn't gotten as much airtime as it probably deserved. And so I'm hopeful that these books maybe help contribute to broader awareness of this interpretation of UFOs, and just continue to move the conversation forward in whatever way it can.
Do you have any favorite sci-fi movies you can recommend?
I liked the show Dark. It's a German program on Netflix. I also enjoyed The Expanse, which was less time travel, more space travel. Dark was more time travel. It was exclusively time travel. I don't think there's any space travel, but it's only recently that I got into sci-fi. I never really watched it or read anything about it, but it is super fun. I enjoy it a lot these days.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm also writing my novel on this on the same topic, and hopefully I will be able to finish it quickly. And good luck to your work as well.
Yeah,
how
thanks.
long?
Good luck with
How
the
long?
novel.
How long you can expect to get your novel or story out?
I don't know. It might be a bit controversial. I'm still trying to decide if I want to put it out there just yet. It could be next year. It could be 10 years from now. It just depends on what the current climate is, as far as the state of the world, I guess. That was a very vague answer. I apologize for that. But I also just started writing it 3 weeks ago, so I don't really have a lot of expectations about the time frame yet.
Okay, one of my audience asked it has you seen The Travelers on Netflix? There is a sub show on the time travel, I think, on Netflix.
No, but I'm writing it down now because I have a list of shows. Because you always hear about something or you want to watch something, and then you got the remote in your hand and you just completely blank. So I'll add that to the list, and look forward to checking it out.
Okay, if somebody wants to follow you on internet, any website, I know I will link your Twitter handle. Is there any website or area where people can follow your work? Or
Yeah, I have a website, michaelpmasters.com, where I have links to information about speaking engagements and interviews and TV shows and things. I'm going to be in Phoenix for the International UFO Congress, October 12th to 16th. I definitely recommend, if people are in that area, to come be a part of that. It's a really great UFO festival, probably my favorite out of all the ones I've been to. But yeah, just michaelpmasters.com, and then there's links to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the other social media platforms.
I will list both of these in the video description. But thank you very much, Dr. Masters. I know you were not feeling well, and
Yeah, it's
you
been a
came.
rough week on the health front, that's for sure. But yeah, no, it's great talking to you, and always is. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, I hope we will see you in the future, and good luck with your works. And thank you very much once again. Take
Thank
care.
you. Good luck with your novel too. Keep me updated about that.
I will definitely do that. Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
All right, cheers.
Ciao. Okay, folks, that was Dr. Michael Masters, the professor from Montana Tech in Butte, Montana, evolutionary anthropologist. Now, अब हम उर्दू पे आ जाते हैं. हमारे जो दोस्त हैं जो ज़्यादा उर्दू सुनते हैं या हिंदी सुनते हैं, ये एक प्रोफेसर, इनका एक ख़ास सब्जेक्ट है. ऑल्दो ही सेज के वो एवोल्यूशनरी बायोलॉजिस्ट है, लेकिन उन्होंने इस एवोल्यूशन की बेस के ऊपर ये एक हाइपोथेसिस दिया है. इट्स स्टिल हाइपोथेसिस. ही सेज कि इट इज़ क्वाइट पॉसिबल कि ये जो लोग मशीन्स देखते हैं, ये जो सो कॉल्ड यूएफओस लोगों को नज़र आती हैं, तो इसका ये कहना है कि हो सकता है कि ये उस तरह एलियंस ना हो जिस तरह हम मीडिया में इसको पोर्ट्रे करते हैं, या हम समझते हैं कि ये मीडिया के अंदर से एलियंस किसी और प्लैनेट से आ रहे हैं. ये कहता है कि हो सकता है ये घर से ज़्यादा नज़दीक हो सकता है ये इसी ज़मीन से आते हो, लेकिन एक मुख्तलिफ टाइम पीरियड से, मतलब फ्यूचर से आते हो. और अगर 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 आप मुझसे पूछेंगे मेरी फेवरेट कंस्पिरेसी थ्योरी कौन सी है, ऑफ कोर्स आई डोंट बिलीव ऑल दिस थिंग्स, बट लेट्स से अगर आप मुझसे पूछेंगे मेरी फेवरेट कंस्पिरेसी थ्योरी कौन सी है, तो आई वुड से कि ये जो कॉन्सेप्ट है टाइम ट्रेवल का, इट मेक मोर सेंस बिकॉज इफ यू कंसिडर ऑल दीज ऑप्शंस, तो आपको ज़्यादा जो है ये ज़्यादा रियलिटी के क्लोज लगेगी. ऑफ कोर्स आई से रियलिटी, लेकिन अगेन विल टेक दिस थिंग विद अ पिंच ऑफ सॉल्ट. तो इस तरह के शोज़ करने का मकसद सिर्फ आपको एक थोड़ी सी एंटरटेनमेंट के साथ साथ ये भी बताना होता है कि दुनिया में लोग जो है वो किस तरह सोचते हैं. तो हम जो है इस चीज़ को ये नहीं कहते कि ये रियलिटी है. आई मीन वी प्रोवाइड दिस इंफॉर्मेशन एज इट इज़, और आप जो है ख़ुद अपने ऊपर उसके ऊपर माइंड बना सकते हैं. लेकिन डेफिनेटली हमारी जो हिस्ट्री है, जिसके अंदर मैं समझता हूँ कि हमारे जो एंसेस्टर्स थे, जिस तरह वो मुख्तलिफ अदवार में डीमंस और एंजल्स और इस तरह की चीज़ों को बयान करते थे, तो मुझे कहीं कहीं लगता है कि हम शायद आज भी वही काम कर रहे हैं. लेकिन चूंकि हम थोड़े से मॉडर्न हो गए, अब हमें शायद शर्म आती है कि हम कहें कि जी मैंने एक एंजल देखा है या मैंने एक डीमन देखा है, तो लोग कहेंगे यार ये तो पागल हो गया, इसको भर्ती कराओ किसी अस्पताल में. तो अब हम उसको टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ जोड़ देते हैं. हम कहते हैं कि नहीं, मैंने जो है यूएफओ देखी है, क्योंकि उसको मैं किसी ना किसी तरह रिलेट कर सकता हूँ. क्योंकि जैसे अभी हमने डिस्कवर किया कि देयर आर बिलियंस एंड बिलियंस ऑफ एक्सो प्लैनेट्स. हो सकता है उसमें कुछ ऐसे भी हो जिनके ऊपर ज़िंदगी के चांस भी हो सकते हो. तो चूंकि एक इस तरह की एक साइंस के अंदर एक चीज़ मौजूद है, तो मुझे ये शायद कहते हुए ज़्यादा मुश्किल ना होती हो कि यार मैंने एलियन देखा है, इफ यू विल. लेकिन कई दफ़ा ये एक कल्चरल एक इशू है. हमारी जो एवोल्यूशन हुई है उसके अंदर ये एक बाई प्रोडक्ट एकदम इस तरह की जो ख्यालात है, बिकॉज ऑफ आवर सर्वाइवल एस्पेक्ट, तो हम इस तरह की चीज़ें बना सकते हैं. तो इट वाज एन इंटरेस्टिंग टॉक. प्लीज़ अगर आपने इस वीडियो को अभी तक लाइक नहीं किया तो कर दें यार, ताकि हम इस तरह के और इंटरेस्टिंग सब्जेक्ट्स आपके लिए लाते रहें. तो मेरा एक दोस्त है मैन फ्रॉम द फ्यूचर, उन्होंने एक कमेंट लिखा था, मैं अगर वो सुन रहे हैं भाई साहब, तो बात ये है, आपने सही कहा कि यार हम भी थक गए एक ही तरह की चीज़ों को सुन सुन के, घिस घिस के. तो हमें कुछ नई सब्जेक्ट मिल जाए. Linda, thank you very much once again also for joining us. Yes, Dr. Master is, I think you can talk with him for hours. He's an interesting chap. I like him. So वो अच्छी स्टोरीज बनाते हैं. तो इसी के साथ आज के शो का इख्तिताम करते हैं. होपफुली वी विल गेट, यस, रे द प्रोड्यूसर कह रहे हैं इनकी बात सुन लें, क्योंकि रे द प्रोड्यूसर जो कहते हैं वो हमेशा सही होता है. लाइक एंड सब्सक्राइब. और भाई जाने से पहले इस वीडियो पे कुछ कमेंट भी कर देना, क्योंकि ये मुझे हमेशा एक शिकायत रही है कि लोग कमेंट नहीं करते. प्लीज लाइक एंड सब्सक्राइब एंड ऑल्सो राइट डाउन योर कमेंट्स, सो आई नो if you had any questions or any concerns or suggestions for me, so I can bring more people from different point of views on our shows. So thank you very much. Take care, good day, good night, and I'll see you guys next time.